Hi. So I'm actually going to be kind of a lot faster. So I'm going to start in the Amazon rainforest. Okay. Hi. This is the Amazon rainforest. Do you guys see the path?
Barely.
You do? Kind of. Yeah, it's pretty hard to see. You have to be able to be pretty aware of your surroundings when you live in the Amazon rainforest. I did live there on and off between 2015 and 2018. So in that context, I was living in an indigenous community, and I learned a lot about plants and plant spirits, also the spirits of the jungle. So being familiar with the spirits of the jungle actually is something that keeps you alive. Knowing which plant is going to curse you, knowing which plant you can use to make medicine, and knowing which plants carry really brutal animals that can also kill you pretty quickly. So the way that I grew up in regards to plants and plant medicine was I was raised by an alternative medicine practitioner who was also a really pretty deeply esoteric person. And I grew up in a very utopian setting on an island, like in a back to the land community. So I didn't have very much context for Western medicine before adolescence. Like my first memory of medicine is actually in selecting flower tinctures with a pendulum. And that was to cure my allergies when I was like 4 or something like that. So that's my first medicine memory. So I mostly had a pretty outsider's view of Western medicine and how it developed. So I'm going to go to the next slide. I wrote a script for this, but I'm actually not reading it, so I can be a little faster. So knowledge of what can kill you in the jungle is super important. It's super, super important. And respecting every type of creature, because every creature and every plant in that setting has really pretty articulate defense mechanisms. So this is an image of a caterpillar. And this caterpillar is eventually going to become a very small, extremely harmless little butterfly. But in this nascent stage, it can actually kill you on contact, or at least that's what they say. So I wouldn't test that theory. Like I wouldn't want to touch it or try to touch it. And the reason is because like when you live in an indigenous community, there's like a synchronicity, a web, if you will, of knowledge that links mythology, the cosmovision, which is like the ritualized representation of space and time and the story of the people, with pharmacology and knowledge of a lot of different species in the jungle. And it does tend to keep people alive pretty well. There are also a lot of curses in the jungle. People get cursed constantly. Villages get cursed constantly. I was cursed a few times. Curses are really, really hard to lift. It's like the most difficult thing to cure, I guess, in shamanism. So other animals, I actually know somebody whose younger sister, she was 21 years old, she was a biology student, and she touched accidentally a tiny green poison dart frog, and it turned her intestines into liquid within a couple of hours. So when I'm talking about like acute awareness of your surroundings, to see a tiny bright green tree frog on a leaf is actually a challenge, even if you're a biologist. So I was moving from there. I was living in that village for a couple of years on and off, a few years, I guess, between 2015 and 2018. I was awarded a Fulbright fellowship to go to London, and I started researching the history of ritual in medicine in a much more indexed context. So I was learning a lot in that village, just in daily life, how medicine approaches to curses, mythology, cures, affects just the mechanics and logistics of daily life. And I became really curious about what the other side of that might be, what types of ancient cultures and contemporary cultures are doing with this material. I was mostly interested in looking at really, really old stuff, so I ended up looking at a lot of Anglo-Saxon medicine, kind of the oldest medical documents that exist in the Anglo world, to try to find something, like some nugget of information that maybe we overlooked while we were constructing this system of Western medicine. And through the lens of plant medicine and ritual, I was really looking at like trinkets and amulets, at incantations and recipes, and looking really kind of deeply. I guess I've read about a couple hundred books on the subject. I still know very surprisingly little about it. I mean, we could talk about it, but it's a vast, vast subject. that does touch a lot on the history of medicine, but also on colonialism, movement of cultures, movement of colonial cultures into indigenous cultures in different contexts, and the way that systems of knowledge are shared. So I was thinking about these rituals, I was reading about these rituals called passing through and pulling through, in which some kind of magical transference takes place between the patient and an object. So it's often like a rebirthing process where like a child would be passed through a tree that was split as a sapling for that purpose. So it would have like this vaginal shaped hole in it. And as the child's passed through it, their suffering will cease because their illness is transferred from the person into the tree, or it creates a magical barrier. The same is true for a lot of northern cultures. So I was also looking at Viking cultures, and these were actually practiced well into the 20th century. So they were actually practiced for thousands of years. So meanwhile, I'm looking at this stuff. I'm thinking still a lot about the Amazon and my experiences there, and I start to make work. So I'm making this work simultaneously while I'm reading about all this stuff, and I'm still thinking about the Amazon. I actually cast this leaf in the Amazon. I brought like a big backpack full of silicone to the Amazon, and I cast this giant Victoria Amazonica, is what it's called. This piece is called The Curse and the Cure, Ghost of the Imperium. And by casting that leaf in the Amazon, a leaf that was named for Queen Victoria by a botanist in the 19th century, and was actually brought to London. So I cast the leaf in the Amazon, I brought the leaf to London, and then I made this like ghostly, fleshy, kind of beautiful, really repulsive thing that was sort of meant to capture the majesty of the spirit of the plant itself, and also to develop some kind of empathy between viewers and the spirit of the plant, or the idea of plant life, anthropomorphizing very intentionally plant life. And I was also retracing, like in a bizarre coincidence, I don't know if it was indeed a coincidence, of that botanist who was originally transporting that plant for Queen Victoria. But while I was doing this, it never escaped me that the primary role of this plant in indigenous Amazonian medicine is to curse people through direct contact, and also to lift very heavy shamanistic curses through ritual. So I was thinking a lot about systems of defense and about developing images of kind of violent femininity, I guess. I'm using a lot of body-shaped forms, body-sized forms, and a lot of repetitive forms in these images. These are made with acrylic pigeon spikes. It looks like glass. It's not glass, though. And they're called defenders. The actual spikes are called defenders, and the pieces themselves are also called defenders. I started thinking about some kind of celebration of the violent feminine, and also about some kind of way to celebrate also natural systems of defense. While I was still thinking about these curses and these cures. So these are pieces that I developed related to those pulling through and passing through concepts, that I would create these sort of systems for rebirth or transference, that also kind of use the pattern finding mechanisms in viewers' brains or in their visual cortex or something to create these like layered replicating forms that are suspended in space. The movements of the objects are very much meant to mimic the scale of limbs and also of movements in passing through and pulling through rituals. So again, with the repetition of forms, it's the same installation, obviously, from a different angle. I started to relate these objects to the concept of horizontalization of systems of knowledge in this very kind of rhizomatic, inclusive way. They became quite, I guess, jungly, if you will, to me. You know, that they were representing this other type of space, time, that was calling on the very, very far past, but also on the present and the way that medicine is practiced in more holistic ways in different parts of the world. So yeah, I think that's about it. I'm going to wrap it up there. So yeah, I'm mostly interested in what would happen to us as a species if we actually started worshiping plants again and validating them as like sentient beings with willpower and character, and seeing what kind of magic we might make with that. So that's it. Thank you very much.